Give it up without further ado, my guy, Yemi.
Well, thank you so much for that intro. How's everyone doing this morning? Cool. Having a good time so far? All right. So, my name is Yemi, and I'll talk more a little bit about my background as a black. But to get started here, kind of showing some numbers. 2021 was a big year for the Web3 world, right? So just some top line numbers, and this my slides are getting blocked a little bit. But the key thing that I want you to keep in mind, looking at that chart, you don't see a whole lot of activity for a whole bunch of years. Then 2021, guess what happens? It starts spiking, right? So just top line numbers here. 34, these numbers are turned into Electric Capital, which is a Web3 venture capital company. And the top line numbers are like 34,000 developers contributed to open source projects in 2021. And 20% of these developers joined the Ethereum ecosystem. And of all the numbers of Web3 developers that are currently at, 60% of these developers joined Web3 in 2021. So if that tells you something, that there's something going on in that in the Web3 space right now. So show of hands real quick. Anyone here currently working in Web3 or, okay, see some hands so you can keep me honest. All right, anybody working in Web2 right now and you're trying to maybe just thinking about Web3, okay? So good, you're in the right spot, so let's go on the right. All right, so a little bit about me. I joined Coinbase in October 2021, and it's been a wild and just exciting ride over the past 8 months or thereabouts. So talking about my background, so prior to Coinbase, I worked in a whole bunch of different industries. She read my intro, but my very first kind of crypto experience really was just buying some Bitcoin back in like 2015. I put a picture of my first transaction of Bitcoin back in 2015 that you can kind of see the date. And guess how much the price of Bitcoin was back then? I just wish I had bought a whole bunch and probably retired somewhere or something. Right? So, but anyways, I would buy some like Bitcoin, pay for this VPN service, right? And just never really kept it. And really that's my majority of my experience with Bitcoin. But when I started working, started my career in database development, and I started as a database developer on Microsoft Visual Force Pro. Anybody here ever worked with Force Pro? Oh my God, that's you know what I'm talking about. It's hard. And the fun fact about Force Pro is you actually had a 2 gig database limit. And I spent many nights just reindexing tables and doing all these crazy things. But here's the thing about that experience. That experience actually taught me that I no longer wanted to focus on legacy technology, and I wanted to focus on the future. So this shift, this mental shift, is why I shifted my career path into like working in the data center space, where I got to work on virtualization before it became the new cloud infrastructure as a service. Worked at Microsoft, where I did a whole lot of SaaS, so the Office 365 space and all. And the key thing that I really enjoy about, and you see where I'm going with this, what I enjoy the most about working in the edge or the leading edge of technology is, first, you solve really interesting problems, right? And the second thing is, you can't Google your problems, because you're really the first person having that problem. So it keeps me on my toes, and really that's one of the reasons why I joined Coinbase, because this is a new, exciting space, and Coinbase and the whole Web3 community is doing something really cool. So that's just a little bit about me. All right, so you're probably wondering, you're a Web2 developer, I saw a whole bunch of hands when I asked the question earlier, and you're thinking, how does your current skill set translate into the Web3 space? So my hope here today is maybe I can help you answer that question, or maybe give you some ideas to help you So here's the agenda. We will do a little bit of 10,000-foot introduction to Web3. Then we'll talk about like the similarities and differences between a Web2 architecture and a Web3 architecture. Then we'll get into some skills. And as we go along, we'll talk about the skills for each one of these architectures. Then at the end, I'll share some resources on how you can get started in this space. Right. So the web, as we know it, has evolved over the past few years. So the very first version of the web, Web 1.0, was mostly about open protocols, and the value was on the edge of the network, right? Then we moved into the Web 2, which was the centralized networks with the Googles and Twitter and all the centralized large technology companies basically centralizing all the power on the internet. Now with Web 3, we have a combination of the old decentralized ethos as well as the modern stack of the Web 2 technology. But here it's more than just the centralization. So first, has anyone here ever had experience trying to send a wire transfer, like for any reason? Can you tell me how long it took? Too long. So wire transfers, like if you don't know, it could take like up to 3 days. But with Web3 and cryptocurrency, you're actually able to do this transaction in seconds or minutes. That's one of the big losses for Web3 space or cryptocurrency. The other key thing is we now have the notion of true ownership, because with Web3, the power no longer is controlled by these centralized companies or the centralized authorities. It now lives with the creators. The user actually controls the content. And because it's controlled by the user, there's more room for innovation. And for my last point, I actually have an example. So a few years ago, I visited Nigeria, because that's where I'm originally from, and I opened a bank account. So put some money in there, did some transaction, and came back to the States. So 3 months later, I was trying to just log into the account and send some money for some transaction. And guess what? I got pretty much a banner that said you have to provide some sort of a new form of identification that never existed when I opened the account before you can make any transaction. Talk about censorship, right? With Web3 and cryptocurrency, that's not gonna happen, right? So because now it's not controlled by any centralized entity, so your money, your funds actually live in your wallet. All right? So let's talk about the skills you need for moving to a Web3 world. So the first thing is, Web3 is a very broad tent, right? So if you're currently working in Web2 and you're thinking, do my skills actually apply in the Web3 space? It probably does, just answer that question right up front. So, but just kind of talking about from a broad standpoint, there are kind of two areas of specialization for Web3 developers. So first is, if you have, like say, a C++ background, you can actually work on the software that runs the blockchain. So like the Bitcoin code and Solana and all these other networks actually run in lower level C++, Go language. So there's room for you there. And if you're more of a front end, back end, and like working in the web application space, you can be a blockchain application developer. All right. So let's talk about what the architecture looks like. It's the big high-level look at the difference between a Web2 and a Web3 application. So over on the left, we have a typical multi-tier application that is built on Web2. So you have your front end, you have your web application, web server, application server, database, and all that. We're all familiar with that. But over on the right is where the Web3 application architecture comes in. So the key thing, the biggest thing that is different in this space now is you're no longer having to do with data that lives in a database necessarily. You now have a distributed ledger, which is the blockchain node that I think it was Matt that talked about earlier. So that is where the data lives. And the second thing that is really key to understand is the identity. So no longer are you managing username and passwords. The identity is now living in the user's private wallet. So those are pretty much the key two things to keep in mind coming into this Web3 space. And this is kind of a busy slide right now, but we're going to double click into this a little bit more and start filling out the layers. Okay, one more thing I want to mention real quick there. So in the Web3 world, the wallet talks to the blockchain server over remote procedure calls, and these are pretty easy to kind of use if you're leveraging like Web3.js or Ether.js JavaScript framework. So if you're a JavaScript person, you feel pretty much better. All right, so this is looking at a Web3 application built on the Ethereum network. So like I mentioned earlier, your front end is still built on, or the UI of the application is totally built on the legacy or existing technology. So if you're a JavaScript, React, HTML, CSS, all that, nothing changes there. Because all you're doing in the end is just building the front end for our application, right? Now, if you go down the stack, your front end is talking to smart contracts. And smart contracts are just programs that run, or self-executing programs that run on the blockchain network. And this is where the application logic lives. And this is probably the biggest difference between a Web2 and Web3 architecture. So within a smart contract, it can't completely live on the blockchain, or you can have a hybrid smart contract where some of the data actually lives on-chain and some of it lives off-chain. And there are solutions like Oracle that actually bring off-chain data into your application. So there's some solutions there. But smart contracts are typically written in Solidity, Viper. So if you're a front-end engineer and trying to get into this space, you want to focus on learning some Solidity, Viper, but we'll talk about some other solutions as well if you're already comfortable in some other languages. So your smart contracts are running on the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM. So EVM doesn't execute Solidity directly. It compiles it into bytecode and then runs that. So ultimately, the Ethereum virtual machine runs on the blockchain node, which you typically can run your own node, or you can have a node provider like Alchemy. I see an Alchemy shared here, or you can run Coinbase Cloud, or you can run your own node as well. All right, so kind of a real quick summary there. So as far as what's not changing, if you have like I mentioned, if you're a React or JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all that is not changing. The key change is the identity, which now lives in the wallet. So for your wallet, you have MetaMask, Coinbase wallet, and a couple other solutions there. And for the backend data store, you would have your blockchain nodes. That's where the data lives, and you would be interacting mostly with the blockchain nodes. And from the app logic standpoint, Solidity is the language you get familiar with to write smart contracts. And like I said, we'll talk about some other solutions there. And for JavaScript library, you would use either JS or Web3.js for interacting with the blockchain nodes. All right, so this is my kind of like fun project. So a couple months ago, I participated in this hackathon at Coinbase where we built a Squid Games-like smart contract where the goal was to basically you deposit some ETH and everyone gets paid up and you pick a random number. So the idea is that a random number gets generated for each round. A random number gets generated, and whoever is closest to the random number gets to proceed to the next round. And at the end of the round, basically the game ends after each person gets killed up, and whoever wins gets all the heat that was deposited. So this was a real fun experience, just learning how to code Solidity. And it was actually a real fun game because we had a video demo. I wish I could play that here, but we had a video demo with all the Squid Game, like music and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty cool. And this is just some code from the hackathon project. You can kind of give you an idea of what a Solidity looks like. And I'll talk later about some tools that help you write your Solidity code and maybe some IDEs that you're already comfortable with. All right, so let's talk about the tools. So as far as the developer framework, HatHack and Truffle are the two major ones that you would want to get familiar with as you work in the Dev3 world. Now, there's also a Remix that is basically an online IDE that allows you to work quickly, spin up an environment to start writing some Solidity code without having to go through the exercise of spinning up your own local development environment. But this table actually kind of shows the whole stack, so like from the blockchain layer to the L2s and the development environment, storage, pretty much the whole stack is shown here. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that in Web3, if you're a developer that is like super confident in your ability and you just never need to ask any questions, you will have a rude awakening in Web3 because it's new. It's maybe not the information is not as maybe organized as the web that we currently know. So you will spend a lot of time on Twitter, on Discord, on Telegram as well. And because a whole lot of developer communities there that interact and answer questions that you may have. Now the key thing, one tip I'll give you, if you ever go on Discord, don't open your DMs because you get all kinds of spam. I don't know if anyone's experienced it that way. But the key thing there is, as a developer in the Web3 space, you have to be basically hanging out in all these channels because that's where the information is. Now the other thing is, for a test environment, there are test networks, typically called testnets, that a lot of these networks or blockchains maintain. And testnets are meant to run the exact same code as mainnet. And sometimes they run the next version, just the newer version of the mainnet. The main difference there is that there's not real funds being transacted on testnet. So you get some funds from what we call a faucet, and basically they're just fake money that you're able to kind of test your code with and see what a transaction is going to look like or what your code is going to do when you actually deploy it on mainnet. All right, so bridging the gap between Web2 and Web3. So we talked earlier about the architecture of a Web2 versus a Web3 application. One thing I want to leave you with is, if you are currently in the Web2 world where you're doing front end, back end, any type of maybe full stack, don't think, I need to be in the space where I'm completely doing Web3. Web2 applications are still relevant because Web3 really can't live on its own right now. It needs those applications, more complex applications, more complex use cases that have a requirement or a need for Web2 technology. So if you're a Web2 developer, there's room for you in the Web3 space as well. Other thing I want to mention real quick is, with some of these blockchain networks, they have compatibility with EVM, which is the Ethereum virtual machine. So if you're writing Solidity code on Ethereum, you can actually easily port those over to other networks as well. So you write once and use multiple places. The last thing is, if you're, there are networks like Solana and Near that actually allows you to write in the language that you're comfortable with, and it compiles compiles into WebAssembly, which is a low-level bytecode, so you don't have to necessarily learn the native Solidity code for that network. But the key thing out of all this technical information that I want to leave you with is two things. First, you need to be very adaptable and flexible in this space. Adaptable because things change and things break really, really quickly. Web3 as we know it right now. So being on this channels, on the Discord channels, Telegram, helps you know what's coming and how that may impact your application. So just hanging out in those channels. And flexibility meaning that as the technology is moving fast, you need to keep learning and you need to just keep up with the technology trends in this space. So how do you get started? There's a really great YouTube channel that I follow. It's called Eat the Blocks. Anybody familiar with Eat the Blocks? Oh, see. Yeah. Look that up. I think he has a subscription as well that you can actually subscribe to and watch some real cool videos. And they're super hands-on. So if you will learn from just doing hands-on work, Eat the Blocks is awesome. Ethereum also has a lot of really cool tutorials on like getting started in Solidity, writing your first smart contract, writing like a hello world contract. Udemy is also a really good resource. Udemy is a little bit like crazy sometimes, but you can usually find some really good resources there. Depending on your learning style, you find it a instructor that works with you. But the real probably the biggest thing though is just jumping in, getting your hands dirty, and participating in hackathons, like solve interesting problems, and really that's how you win. So I'll leave you with my contact information, but final wrap up is Web3 to Web2, Web2 to Web3 transition is not hard, or maybe not as hard as you think. The key thing is just know that you need to be adaptable, so information is always going to change, and as long as you're not afraid to just jump in and get your hands dirty, I think you have a lot of fun. So thank you. Questions? Can you go to the mic?
Hey, thanks for this talk. This was super helpful. You can go back to this slide. I think you had it's like web server, you had client, and then web server. No, okay, actually no. Yeah. So what do you imagine? So this is really helpful coming from like the Web2 world. What sorts of data in a real world application do you imagine being stored in this big block that says blockchain? Like, when I look at this, I see you have your front end of your app, and then like your entire back end is now blockchain, profile pictures, content, music, like everything. Like, what do you see happening on the blockchain, and what do you think is going to stay in traditional data sources?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what I'm showing here is pretty much a very high level without getting into the weeds of the actual like architecture. This previous one actually probably showed a little bit more realistic architecture. And you can see there that you have the option to actually have your like Web2 type database backend, right? So that there are some complex data structures that don't necessarily play too well with Web3 right now. So you can still put those on your MongoDBs or NoSQL, whatever your preferred data store is, right? And the other thing also to keep in mind is that there are on-chain solutions. If you look in the web stack here, file storage. So we have like FileCon, IPFS, and all these other solutions that are distributed and even as well.
Special announcement before you go about lunch.
So you gotta, hi everybody, how y'all doing? Hi everybody, how y'all doing? Thank you. Okay, so about lunch, you should have received a ticket this morning. It has a number and a letter. Your number tells you when So 1, 2, 3, 4, and they'll announce it out there. Your letter tells you where. So if you have A, you're going to be outside. B, you're going to be inside. I'm going to repeat that. A is where? B is, your number is, see, your number is where? See, I have to check for understanding. So number is where? Yes.
Just got a notification on Discord saying disregard.
Okay, so follow on Discord, because I was following what they said on Discord. A is inside, B is outside. So flip that around. A is, come on, y'all gotta change with me. What did he just say? You ready to change, right? Say it again. No, I'm saying, so what? Say, don't worry about numbers?
All lunch lines are open. Please disregard the numbers assigned earlier.
Alright, so guess what, y'all? Go eat. Alright, how about that? He not done. Were there any more questions?